phone was warm. That's the detail I keep coming back to. Not that I found it, not what was on it, but that it was warm, tucked behind my wife's winter coats like she just set it down and hadn't heard me come up the stairs. I'd gone looking for a shoebox of old tax documents. I came down holding a phone I'd never seen in 10 years of marriage, a phone with a passcode I didn't know, buzzing once in my hand before it went dark again. I told myself it was nothing. A spare phone, a work thing. Every lawyer's instinct in me knew better, and every husband's instinct in me wanted to believe the lie anyway. I didn't know yet that the phone would lead me to a brother-in-law I never knew existed, a man hunting him who didn't care who got hurt along the way, and a version of my wife I had never once been allowed to meet. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My name is Nathan Whitaker. I'm a corporate and family attorney here in Boise, Idaho, and if you've watched any of my other stories, you know my house rarely stays quiet for long. My wife Emma runs our household with a steadiness that used to make me feel safe. My mother-in-law, Marjorie, has never fully trusted me, though that's a story for another day. My son, Silas, and my daughter Hazel are usually the loudest thing in any room we're in. None of that prepared me for a phone hidden behind a row of coats, whose number was saved under a single letter, D. Why had my wife, a woman who told me everything, told me nothing about this? And when I finally worked up the nerve to ask her, why did her first reaction look less like guilt and more like fear? I didn't know it yet, but I was about to learn that some secrets aren't kept to protect the person keeping them. Some are kept to protect someone else entirely. Emma and I met the way a lot of lawyers meet the people who end up running their lives better than they run their own cases. At a mediation neither of us wanted to be at. On opposite sides of a dispute so small in hindsight that neither of us can remember, today, which side we were even on. She was sharper than the attorney across the table from her, and I told her so afterward, in the parking lot, badly, in a way that should have ended the conversation and somehow started one instead. We got married 2 years later. My mother-in-law, Marjorie, walked Emma down the aisle herself. Emma's father had passed when she was in her 20s, something she spoke about rarely and carefully, the way you handle a wound that never fully closed. I respected that. I never pushed. In 10 years of marriage, I'd learned that Emma's past was a house with certain doors she kept shut, and I told myself a good husband doesn't force his way into rooms his wife isn't ready to open. What I didn't know, what I would only learn later, was that one of those doors didn't belong to grief. It belonged to a person. Emma grew up outside Twin Falls, the older of 2 children. She almost never mentioned a sibling, and on the rare occasions his name came up, her voice would go flat in a way that didn't invite follow-up questions. I'd assumed, the way you assume things about people you love instead of asking them outright, that there had been a falling out, a rift. The kind of family estrangement that shows up in half the households I've represented over the years. Messy, mutual, and usually not worth excavating. I built our entire marriage on that assumption. It turned out to be wrong in almost every particular. Our life, on the surface, was ordinary in the best sense of the word. I made partner at my firm 4 years ago. Emma worked part-time doing bookkeeping for a handful of small local businesses, work she was good at and quietly proud of. Work that let her be home when Silas got off the bus and Hazel needed a ride to gymnastics. Marjorie lived 20 minutes away, in a condo she downsized into after Emma's father died, and she came for Sunday dinners with an opinion about my career, my parenting, and occasionally my posture. It was a good life. I want to be clear about that before I tell you what happened, because it would be easy, hearing the rest of this story, to assume our marriage had been rotting quietly for years, and I simply hadn't noticed. That isn't what this is. Emma wasn't unhappy. She wasn't distant. She loved our children with the kind of ferocity that made other parents at school events visibly relax when she showed up, because you knew nothing was getting past her. She was, in other words, exactly the woman I thought I'd married. She just happened to also be carrying something none of us were allowed to see. Looking back now, there were small things. A particular unease that crossed her face whenever a certain kind of truck idled too long on our street. A habit of checking the locks twice before bed, every night, that I'd chalked up to nothing more than a careful mother's instinct. A cousin's wedding, 2 summers back, that Emma had begged off attending at the last minute, citing a stomach bug that never seemed to actually make her sick. I noticed all of it. I filed none of it away as meaningful. That's the particular blindness of a good marriage. You stop looking for reasons to worry because you've run out of reasons to expect them. The Tuesday everything changed started like any other. Silas had a spelling test. Hazel had left one shoe under the couch, as she does at least twice a week, and we were 15 minutes from being late for school when I went up to the hall closet looking for a shoebox of old tax paperwork Emma swore she'd stored on the top shelf. I found the paperwork. I also found a phone that wasn't mine, wasn't Emma's, not the Emma I knew, anyway. Pushed to the back of the shelf behind 3 winter coats we hadn't worn since March. I almost put it back. That's the part I'm not proud of. In hindsight, not that I found it, but that some old-fashioned, well-trained instinct told me to slide it behind the coats exactly where it had been and pretend the last 30 seconds hadn't happened. Whatever this was, it wasn't mine to open. I'd spent a career respecting the difference between what you're allowed to look at and what you're not. Then it buzzed in my hand. A single word lit the screen before it went dark. D. No last name, no preview of the message, just a letter, glowing, gone. I stood in that closet longer than I should have. Tax documents forgotten on the floor by my feet, running through every explanation a rational person tells himself in that exact position. A spare phone for work. Something for her mother, who occasionally lost hers. A surprise she was planning. A gift. An anniversary thing. Something sweet I was about to ruin by being suspicious. I told myself all of that, and I believed almost none of it, and I carried the phone downstairs anyway. Emma was at the kitchen counter, packing Hazel's lunch, when I set it down in front of her without a word. I watched her face do something I had never once seen it do in 10 years of marriage. It didn't go red with embarrassment, the way it would if I'd caught her hiding a surprise party or an extravagant purchase she didn't want me to see. It went white. Her hands stopped moving. For a full 3 seconds, my wife, a woman who has never once been at a loss for words in front of me, not once, not during our worst arguments, said absolutely nothing. "Whose is it?" I said, not a question. I didn't have the heart to make it one. "Nathan." "Whose is it, Emma?" She looked toward the stairs, toward the kids' rooms, made sure Silas wasn't within earshot, and then she said 4 words that rearranged everything I thought I understood about the woman I'd married. "It's my brother's phone." I want to be honest about how I reacted, because it wasn't graceful. My first thought wasn't compassion. It was arithmetic. 10 years of marriage, countless conversations about family, about her father, about the rift she'd always implied but never explained. And not once, not one single time, had the word brother come up in present tense. I'd built an entire understanding of my in-laws around an only child who wasn't one. "You don't have a brother," I said, which was, on its face, an absurd thing to say to a woman holding evidence to the contrary. "I have a brother," Emma said quietly. "His name is Derek. And he's in trouble, Nathan. Real trouble. And I need you to let me handle it without asking me anything else right now." If you've been married a while, you know that particular kind of request. The one that asks you to trust blindly at the exact moment trust feels hardest to give. I didn't handle it well. I asked anyway. I asked more than once, over the following 2 days, in a tone that started as concerned and curdled, slowly, into something closer to resentment. Emma gave me fragments. A brother 4 years younger. A falling out that wasn't really a falling out, a disappearance, on Derek's part, nearly 11 years ago, that Emma had always attributed to trouble he'd gotten into as a young man, and never fully explained to me, because she said she'd promised him she wouldn't. What she hadn't told me, what I only learned because Silas, of all people, mentioned it in passing over dinner that Thursday, was that Emma had been driving out past the edge of town twice a week for the last several months. "Where do you go on Tuesdays and Thursdays, Mom?" Silas asked, entirely without agenda, the way 10-year-olds ask the questions adults spend years avoiding. "You always look sad when you come back." I watched Emma's fork stop halfway to her mouth. I watched her recover, smoothly, the way she always did in front of the kids. Some story about errands, about a friend from her bookkeeping clients, and I sat there at my own dinner table understanding, with total clarity, that my wife had been maintaining 2 separate lives under one roof, and I had only just discovered the second one existed. That night, after the kids were asleep, I told her I wasn't asking as her husband anymore. I was asking as a lawyer who represents people in trouble for a living, and I needed to know exactly what kind of trouble her brother was in, because a hidden phone, and a face that went white, and a decade of silence didn't add up to a family disagreement. It added up to something someone was actively hiding from, and hiding well. Emma sat down across from me at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd done homework with Silas and iced cupcakes with Hazel 100 times, and she told me the first true thing she'd said in 2 days. "If I tell you," she said, "you can't do anything about it the way you'd do something about a case. You can't call anyone, you can't file anything, because the last time someone tried to help Derek the official way, it almost got him killed." Here's what Emma finally told me, in pieces, over that night and the next. Derek Booker had been, in his early 20s, a dispatcher for a regional trucking outfit called Redwood Freight Holdings, based 2 states over. It was steady work, nothing glamorous, until Derek noticed the manifests didn't match the loads. Trucks logged as running produce and industrial parts that were, according to the paperwork he wasn't supposed to see, carrying something else on certain overnight routes. He didn't go looking for it. He stumbled into it, the way most whistleblowers do, doing his actual job too carefully for someone else's comfort. He told one person, a regional supervisor he trusted. Within a week, that supervisor was gone, reassigned to a route 700 miles away, and Derek understood, correctly, that the company already knew he knew. He went to federal investigators instead of staying quiet, which was either the bravest or most reckless decision of his life, depending on which day you asked Emma. The case against Redwood's inner circle took years to build. Derek testified, eventually, against men who had every reason and every resource to make sure he regretted it. He'd been living under a different name, in a different state, for most of the decades since. Emma was the only member of the family who'd ever been trusted with how to reach him, because their mother, Marjorie, had never been able to keep the secret from showing on her face, and because the fewer people who knew, the safer Derek stayed. Emma had visited him twice a month for the better part of a year, not because anything new had happened, but because one of the men from the original case, a man named Craig Faulkner who had done federal time and gotten out 18 months ago, had started making inquiries in the area where Derek was living. Inquiries that suggested Faulkner hadn't forgotten who put him away, and hadn't forgiven it either. He found out where Derek's been staying, Emma said, hands wrapped so tightly around her coffee mug, her knuckles had gone pale. Not exactly, not yet, but close enough that Derek's handler told him to move again, and he needed help doing it fast, and he needed someone he trusted completely. And Nathan, I couldn't tell you. Every person who knows is a risk to him. That was never about not trusting you. It was about limiting the number of people who could accidentally slip. I sat with that for longer than felt comfortable, turning it over the way I'd turn over a client's story, looking for the seam that doesn't hold. But it held. It explained the phone. It explained a decade of a brother who'd apparently vanished. It explained Marjorie's occasional far-off silences at Sunday dinner that I'd always mistaken for simple grief over her late husband. What it didn't explain was why, 3 days after that conversation, a car I didn't recognize sat parked across from our house for 40 minutes before pulling away. I didn't tell Emma at first. I told myself it was nothing. A real estate agent scouting the neighborhood. A lost driver checking a map. But the lawyer in me, the part of my brain trained for over a decade to notice when a story doesn't sit right, kept circling back to it at odd hours. When it happened again 4 days later, this time with someone sitting behind the wheel long enough to make Hazel ask from the front window, "Dad, why is that car just sitting there?" I stopped pretending. I hired a private investigator the following morning, not to look into Emma, but to look into whoever was watching our house. Her name was Wanda Cortez, a retired county sheriff's deputy who now did discreet work for people who couldn't go to the police without creating more danger than they solved. I'd used her once before, years back, on a custody case where a client's ex had started following her to work. She was thorough, unflappable, and entirely uninterested in drama, which is exactly what I needed. I told Wanda everything Emma had told me. Wanda ran the plate off a grainy photo I'd taken through our front blinds and came back to me 2 days later with a name that made my stomach drop, even though I'd been half expecting it. Craig Faulkner. He's not watching your house because of your wife, Wanda told me, sitting across from me at her cluttered office downtown. A folder of surveillance photos spread between us. He's watching it because your wife is the last confirmed contact anyone has for Derek Booker. If Faulkner can't find Derek directly, he'll settle for finding whoever Derek still trusts enough to call. That was the moment the fear stopped being abstract. It stopped being about a secret my wife had kept and became about a threat sitting, quite literally, on my street, close enough to see my children's bedroom windows. I confronted Emma with what Wanda had found, and for the first time since the closet, I watched something in her composure genuinely crack. Not because I'd caught her in a lie. She hadn't lied to me, not once, since that first night. But because the thing she'd spent a decade protecting her family from had arrived at our front door anyway, despite every precaution, despite every silence she'd kept. I thought if I kept it far enough from you and the kids, it would stay far enough away, she said. I was wrong. And now I don't know how to fix it without putting Derek in more danger. Or you. Or Silas and Hazel. Marjorie, when Emma finally told her what was happening, didn't react with the shock I expected. She reacted with something closer to exhausted recognition. a mother who had been quietly bracing for this call for 11 years and had simply been waiting to find out which version of it would finally arrive. "I told her not to keep visiting him so often," Marjorie said to me. The first genuinely vulnerable thing my mother-in-law had ever said in my presence. I told her every trip was a risk. She wouldn't hear it. She said a brother who saved that many people's futures by testifying deserved a sister who showed up. I understood, hearing that I hadn't married a woman who kept secrets easily. I'd married a woman who carried an impossible one because the alternative was abandoning someone she loved to face it alone, and had simply never found a way to let me carry any of the weight with her. That didn't undo 2 days of feeling shut out of my own marriage, but it reframed the shape of the hurt into something I recognized. Not betrayal, but a burden Emma had never believed she was allowed to set down, even briefly, even with me. In the days between hiring Wanda and that call, our house took on a strange, doubled quality, ordinary on the surface, charged. I still made Silas's lunch and drove Hazel to gymnastics and sat through a Tuesday partners meeting at the firm, as though nothing in my life had changed. All while checking our driveway camera app so often that Emma finally took my phone from my hand at dinner one night and set it face down on the counter. Not unkindly, just firmly, the way you'd stop a person from picking at a wound. "You can't live like this," she told me. "I've been living like this for 11 years. I know how it eats at you if you let it. You have to keep some part of your day normal, or it'll take everything." It was strange, being coached through fear by someone who'd clearly had years of private practice at exactly this. I found myself watching Emma differently in those days, not with suspicion anymore, but with something closer to awe. The woman who packed Hazel's lunches and argued with me about whose turn it was to call the plumber had also spent a decade managing a threat most people would have collapsed under, and she'd done it without a single visible crack in the life she built for the rest of us. Marjorie, when she learned what Wanda had found, insisted on coming to stay with us for a few nights rather than staying alone at her condo, though she framed it, in typical Marjorie fashion, as doing us a favor rather than needing one herself. She sat at our kitchen table each evening, with a cup of tea going cold in front of her, watching the street through the front window with an alertness I hadn't seen in her before, and I understood, watching her, that she'd spent just as many years bracing for this as Emma had, just from a slightly greater distance. Wanda's next call came 4 nights later, at 11:40, and it told us Faulkner wasn't just watching anymore. He'd started asking questions at Marjorie's condo building. Here's a quick thought before we keep going. If this story has you gripped already, tap that like button. It genuinely helps stories like this one reach more people who need to hear them. Wanda's information turned out to be only half the picture, and the missing half changed everything. Faulkner wasn't operating alone, and he wasn't simply hunting Derek out of old resentment the way Emma had assumed. Wanda's deeper background check, the kind of digging that takes patience, not luck, turned up something none of us had considered. Faulkner had, in the 18 months since his release, quietly reconnected with 2 other former employees of Redwood Freight Holdings who'd avoided prosecution the first time by staying silent. One of them, it turned out, still worked in logistics for a regional shipping company with a contract that ran, of all places, through a warehouse less than 3 miles from Marjorie's condo. It wasn't a coincidence that Faulkner had ended up asking questions in our town. Derek's handler had relocated him to Boise specifically because it was quiet, unconnected to the original case, far from anyone with a reason to look. What none of us had accounted for was that the very shipping contracts Faulkner's associates still had access to ran straight through it. Faulkner wasn't just hunting a witness who'd wronged him a decade ago. He was trying to quietly rebuild the same operation that had gotten him convicted in the first place, using the same routes, the same contacts, and Derek, wherever he was hiding, remained the one person alive who could identify every name attached to it, past and present. Silencing him wasn't revenge, it was insurance. I sat with Wanda in her office as she laid this out, feeling the ground shift under a story I thought I'd already understood completely. This wasn't a decade-old grudge slowly catching up with my brother-in-law. It was an active, ongoing threat, and my wife, without meaning to, without any way of knowing, had become the single thread connecting Faulkner to the one man who could stop him permanently. "You need to call the FBI agent who ran the original case," Wanda told me, sliding a business card across the desk that Emma had apparently kept, folded small, in the back of her wallet for 11 years, in case of exactly this. Not local police, not a private fix. This is bigger than watching your street. I called that night. The agent, a woman named Wanda, had dealt with before, on an unrelated matter years back, which told me something about how small this particular world actually was, listened to 20 minutes of everything Emma and I knew, and confirmed, quietly, that they'd already begun a fresh inquiry into Faulkner's post-release activity. Our information didn't start the investigation. It accelerated it, and it likely kept Derek from becoming collateral in whatever Faulkner was rebuilding. Emma's face, when I told her the call was made, didn't relax the way I expected. It tightened instead, into something braced for a different kind of loss. "If they move on Faulkner now," she said, "Derek has to disappear again. Somewhere new. Somewhere I can't visit twice a month anymore, because it'll be too dangerous for both of us until this is fully resolved." That was the cost of doing the right thing, and none of us pretended otherwise. 2 nights later, federal agents relocated Derek before dawn, to a location Emma wasn't given and didn't ask for, understanding for the first time in a decade that not knowing was, itself, a form of protecting him. I watched my wife say goodbye to a brother she couldn't hug, over a phone call I wasn't allowed to be in the room for, and I understood, fully, finally, the size of what she'd been carrying alone since she was 26 years old. "I should have told you the day we got engaged," she said to me afterward, sitting on the edge of our bed, the second phone finally, permanently dark on the nightstand between us. "I told myself I was protecting you by not telling you. I think really, I was protecting myself from having to watch you decide whether you could handle marrying into this. I married you," I told her, "not a version of you with the hard parts filed off. You should have trusted me with all of it a long time ago, but I understand why you didn't, and I'm not going anywhere because of it." We sat together for a long time after that, not talking, just present in the same room, the way you learn to be present after a crisis finally exhales. Silas knocked once, asking if we were coming down for dinner, and Emma called back that we'd be down in a minute, her voice already steadying itself back into the shape our children expected to hear. That too was a skill I hadn't fully appreciated until that week, the particular strength it takes to carry a private earthquake and still walk downstairs sounding like nothing happened, for the sake of 2 kids who needed their evening to feel ordinary. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept replaying 11 years of small, unexplained moments, the locked doors, the flinch at certain trucks, the cousin's wedding she'd suddenly been too sick to attend, and understanding, one by one, exactly what each of them had actually been. It wasn't a comfortable exercise, but it was, I think, a necessary one, the kind of accounting a marriage sometimes needs after a truth this large finally surfaces. The investigation into Craig Faulkner and Redwood Freight Holdings' quiet second act took 4 months to fully unwind, and I only learned the details the way the public eventually did, through an indictment that made regional news, naming 6 individuals, Faulkner among them, for conspiracy charges connected to the same trafficking network he'd been convicted of a decade earlier. Derek's name never appeared in any public filing. That had been the entire point of the years he'd spent disappearing in the first place, and the agents handling the case had made certain it stayed that way. 3 weeks after the indictment came down, Emma got a call from a number she didn't recognize, and this time she took it in front of me, at our kitchen table, and put it on speaker without being asked. It was Derek. I'd never heard his voice before that moment, a fact that struck me harder than I expected. Hearing a grown man's voice for the first time, and understanding it belonged to family. He sounded tired in the specific way people sound tired after carrying something for a very long time and finally being allowed to set part of it down. He thanked Emma. He thanked me by name, which told me she'd talked about me to him over the years in a way I hadn't realized, that even in hiding, even unable to visit or call freely, Derek had known who his sister had married and had formed some private opinion of me I'd never been consulted on. She used to write me letters, Derek said, back before all this. Real letters, on paper, because email wasn't safe. She'd tell me about you before you two were even married. I feel like I've known you almost as long as she has, and you've never once heard my voice. It's a strange thing, forgiveness. How it can arrive not as a single dramatic gesture, but as an accumulation of small honesties. Offered late, offered imperfectly, but offered all the same. I didn't need Derek's approval, but hearing it, unprompted, in a voice roughened by a decade of near misses and forced disappearances, settled something in me that I hadn't realized was still unsettled. Marjorie, for her part, finally told me, over a Sunday dinner 3 months later, with something almost like relief in her voice, that her early wariness of me hadn't ever really been about me at all. It had been about the terror of loving someone new enough to eventually need to trust them with her son's life, and not knowing, for the first several years of my marriage to Emma, whether I was someone who could hold that kind of weight without dropping it. You held it, she told me, simply, passing the potatoes. That's all I needed to know. Derek remains, as of this telling, somewhere I don't know and don't ask about, rebuilding a version of a life he was never allowed to fully have. Emma writes him letters again, real ones, on paper, and I've come to understand that some kinds of love in a family don't get to look like a phone call whenever you want one. Sometimes they look like patience and trust and a willingness to hold space for someone you can't see. The phone still sits in a drawer in our bedroom, dead now, disconnected, kept for reasons neither of us has fully put into words. Maybe it's a reminder of how close we came to losing something we hadn't even known was at stake. Maybe it's just proof that the family you marry into is never fully visible on the day you say your vows, that there are always rooms you haven't been shown yet, and the measure of a marriage isn't whether those rooms exist, but what you do the day one of the doors finally opens. About how easily I could have slid that phone back behind the coats and let the moment pass unexamined, the way I'd let 100 smaller unexplained things pass over 10 years of marriage. I didn't. And because I didn't, my wife finally got to stop carrying something alone that had been slowly wearing her down for over a decade. What would you have done, in that closet, holding a phone that wasn't yours? I'm not sure I'd have made the right choice if I hadn't already spent years learning, in my career, how to sit with an uncomfortable truth instead of looking away from it. I'm grateful, now, That instinct carried over into my own home when it mattered most. If you've made it this far with me, thank you, genuinely. Stories like this one are hard to tell, because they ask you to sit with the uncomfortable parts of a marriage instead of rushing past them, and I know that's not always an easy watch. I want to ask you something directly, the way I've asked before. What do you think about the choice Emma made, all those years ago, to carry her brother's secret entirely alone, rather than risk bringing me into it sooner? Was she protecting our marriage, or was she quietly making a decision about how much of me she trusted, without ever giving me the chance to prove her wrong earlier? I genuinely love to hear where you land on that. So drop a comment below and let me know your honest take. I read every single one, even the ones that disagree with me. If this story moved you even a little, do me a favor and hit that like button before you go. It costs you nothing, and it tells me, and it tells this whole community, that stories like Emma's and Derek's are worth telling. If you know someone in your life who's ever carried a family secret they felt they couldn't share, even with the person closest to them, send this one their way. Sometimes a story like this is easier to start a hard conversation with than trying to find the words yourself. Make sure you've subscribed to this channel if you haven't already, and turn on that notification bell too, because I've got more stories like this one coming. Stories about my wife, my mother-in-law, my kids, and the moments that changed everything in ways I never saw coming. You won't want to miss the next one. And before you go, one more thing I always love asking. Tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching this from tonight. I've heard from viewers on nearly every continent at this point, and it still amazes me every single time. Wherever you are, whatever kitchen table or couch or car you're listening from, thank you for spending this hour with me and my family. It means more than you know. I'll see you in the next one.